So, about a week ago, I saw a video on TikTok. It was a video about a Catholic priest who had many pet dogs, and apparently one of his dogs used to follow him to church for mass. And the dog doesn't just follow him to church, the dog also sits inside the church during mass. So, for example, in the video, the dog sat close to the pew while the priest was at the back of the church. And during procession, that is the moment where the priest begins to walk towards the sanctuary, the dog also began following the priest to the sanctuary and even climbed the altar. And while the priest was saying the prayers of the Eucharist and all of that, the dog was around the altar. And I was a little bit puzzled and unsettled. So I commented in the video that dogs should not be allowed on sanctuaries because the sanctuary is a sacred place and it's not meant for animals. I understand that this is maybe our society has evolved and now we have a closer relationship with our pets, but it's not that we should begin to erase the clear boundaries between what is emotional and what is sacred, even though nowadays many people in our world are no longer religious. But regardless of that, some things in certain religions I cannot allow animals to participate in. If it were Hinduism or voodoo, maybe animals can participate. I've seen videos of Hindu priests, engaging in their rituals, and a bull or a cow is present in their temple. But in Christianity, maybe we're not Judaism anymore. We no longer practice Judaism. But in Christianity, we no longer need animal sacrifices, or do we need an animal in the church itself? And people give again excuses of Saint Anthony and the donkey and whatever. But as of the weekend, when I checked my comments, it already had 60 replies, and out of those 60, majority of them were bullying me and trolling me. Now, understand that people living in Western societies have a closer relationship with their pets, especially their dogs. You can see them in their trains, in the subway with their dogs, kissing their dog. For most of us here, I won't say all of us in Africa, but for most of us here in Africa, yes, we might have a close relationship with our pets, but we set boundaries. For example, most of us don't allow our dogs to sleep on our beds. You can sleep in the room maybe, or on the floor, not on the bed with us. And it's not just about cultural views. Another reason also because of diseases. Not only in Africa. Yes, Africa is a tropical continent and all of that. But even in the USA, there are cases where people will interact with dogs and unknowingly they would ingest dog feces. For example, when a dog defecates, it can maybe roll his body, or one part of the body will touch the feces and you would know. You would not know. So when you play with your dog, you pat it, you pet it and whatever, you stroke it, and then you use that same hand to touch your mouth or your eyes without you washing your hands, there's a high chance of you getting different kinds of diseases, mostly zoonotic diseases, that pass from animals to humans. Now, regardless of all this, I think we understand why a priest who is educated, went to seminary and all of that, would allow dogs to be on the sanctuary. Now, I understand that, like I said earlier, I understand that you might have some kind of relationship with your pets. But regardless of that, no matter how much you love your dog, would your dog be present in your room while you have intercourse with your partner? Obviously not, except you are not mentally alright. But a sane human being would not allow the dogs to be there when having intimate sexual relationship with an intimate partner. Then if that's the case in your own bedroom, then what about on the church, on the sanctuary, the most sacred place for Christianity? Now, my concern, even besides all of these views, my concern is that what if the dog loses his mind and begins to bark on the altar? I'm not saying humans can't lose their mind, but there's a higher tendency for the animals to lose their mind. Now, what if the dog defecates on the altar? Yes, I know that you can train a dog to use the toilet and all of that, but dogs are not human beings. So even if the dog can be trained on how to use this, doesn't mean that 99.9% of times they would adhere to that. There are exceptions where they would defecate anywhere they find themselves, and that's happened. That's why even when people take their dog on strolls, maybe people can report them to authorities because their dog is defecating all around the streets, and maybe the neighbors will call you to come and pack your dog shit in the compound. So also, if the dog can maybe at some point in time do some of these things. Then why not on the altar? To the dog, there's no difference between the altar and the road. Simply because people are wearing robes and sitting on the altar or the sanctuary doesn't mean the dog will be conscious and know that, okay, this is a sacred place and I will have to compose myself. Yes, I know that God is all powerful and ever merciful, and he can maybe inspire the dog to be faithful and not to bark and to be well composed. I've heard of cases where animals compose themselves within a religious gathering, but animals are animals. Animals are not rational beings. They're not human beings. So there's still a chance that they would lose their mind and desecrate the sanctuary, which is seen as sacred by us Christians. And what if the dog even loses his mind? Because for Catholics and by extension Orthodox Christians, the Eucharist is the most sacred thing that we hold dear. So if the dog is on the sanctuary, what if this dog maybe one day just loses his mind and goes and eats the wafers for Eucharist or drinks the wine? You can't tell, because animals are not human beings. I'm not saying human beings can't do this, but there's a lower tendency for humans to do this compared to an animal. Now imagine if this happens, this would be a very great sacrilege. Even the bishop and even maybe the pope, it will go viral. And this priest that people are going around defending and saying he didn't do anything wrong by letting his dog in the church, even they will begin to judge this priest for letting his dog on the altar. And people began insulting me when I made that comment about the sanctuary being a sacred place and dogs not being allowed there. They said, oh, you would not allow a dog on the sanctuary, but you would allow an evil person on the sanctuary. That doesn't give any excuses. Evil people, yes, they are human beings, but God is not simply because you are human or because you are an animal. Humans who are on the altar are expected to be people of good reputation. So for the fact that there are some evil people, even maybe in the clergy, some people are abusers, idlers, it's not a new thing. But regardless of that we have evil people in the church doesn't mean every human or every priest or every clergy person is evil. And that's not an excuse for us to give animals the right to climb our altar, except you want to start ordaining dog priest or donkey nun or donkey bishop. Now, when I look at all these things, I realize how bad our society has gone. Yes, you might see this as controversial, but just over the last century, we were fighting for human rights and women's rights and liberation from colonization and all that stuff. And here we are fighting for animal rights. I'm not saying it's wrong to fight for animal rights, but when it comes to animal rights, there should be some boundaries. For example, some people who are even extreme can even go to the point of arguing that they want to get married to their dog because they love their dog. And if they should bring up the arguments with rationale based on animal rights and whatever, you can actually win the arguments. But does that mean that as human beings you're going to get married to animals? Not at all. No. That is against the laws of nature. So also, we should have boundaries. In Western societies, even Pope Francis, before he passed away, he lamented on how people are no longer giving birth to children, where dogs and cats have taken the place of children in the house, and people would carry cribs and baby walker or baby stroller, and then when you look into the baby stroller or the baby carrier, it's a dog that's inside there. It's sad. And now, it has become even so much worse that most modern day Western philosophers have now focused their argument on animals. Yes, again, this might be controversial. I understand it is nice if we treat the animals well and all of that, but this is the thing. Animals are animals. They are lower animals. We are higher animals. And now, the argument now is based on if animals are sentient beings. And that is why you see a high rate of advocacy for veganism. Most people now want us to be vegans, but that's not originally how humans were created or even how we evolved. For example, even a chimpanzee or a gorilla, they are omnivorous. A lion is carnivorous. If you tell a lion to stop eating meat and to eat only vegetables, the lion will die out of sickness. And even many modern day vegetarians or vegans, they suffer from nutritional deficiency and they end up taking supplements for simple nutrients that they would have had from a simple meal containing beef or fish or chicken, simply because of their woke ideologies about animal rights and all that nonsense. Now, this also reminds me of something that happened back in 2021 when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. The US citizens and diplomats left the country in a hurry. They filled the plane with their dogs and cats, while leaving behind their fellow co-workers, their local Afghan allies who worked with them for the past 2 decades. These people risked their life, worked with the Americans, and they swore allegiance to the American state and to democracy in Afghanistan. When the Taliban took over, these same people who stood with them for the last 20 years were pushed aside. And then what? The plane was filled with dogs and cats. So imagine where your fellow humans are left behind. At this point, the whole world was thinking that the Taliban would execute all of these people who were former workers for the Westerners. That's what the world was thinking. So even if you had that thought in mind that, oh, these people are going to be killed and all of that, what should be in your instinct? What should be in your mind at that point? What should be at your mind would be to save them, right? You could buy another dog if your dog dies, but you can't buy another human being. Even if you buy that human being will have the same memories and personality and all of that. Like I said again, it's important that we love our animals and all of that. But what is more important, human lives or the animals? And this is quite sad because our society has degenerated. Yes, we might see it as progressive, we might see it as nice and all of that nonsense. But the truth is, we have forgotten many topics, so many issues that plague our human species and focus so much on animals who don't really care about us. There are cases where I know even people argue about, oh, if you take care of an animal, even if it's wild, even if it's carnivorous, the animal would know you and love you. I've seen cases where people make friends with alligators and lions and tigers, and they keep these animals without any maybe safety measures. They play with the animal, they swim in the same water with animals. And in many, many cases, nature would win the argument over nurture. The nature of the animal is to be aggressive. And in many cases, these animals have eaten their own owner that kept them right from their childhood and nurtured them to adulthood. And they were eaten within the twinkle of an eye. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that even if you should love your animal with all your heart, and even if you should bring it up within a human environment, these animals are still animals. There was even a case where a chimpanzee was kept as a pet. The chimpanzee was treated like a human being, he wore its dresses, gave its tea, and all that nonsense. But the day came where this animal's nature took over his nurture, and then he mauled everyone to death. That is just a reminder that humans are always humans, no matter how hard we might be on ourselves, no matter how irrational we might be sometimes, no matter the problems we might have as a species, no matter the wars and the famines and the fightings. But humans remain humans and animals remain animals. Thank you, and see you in my next video.